Today we are going to be discussing the consequences of human actions. And so to begin, let's look at some general information about what consequences are and how they affect human actions. So first, consequences can be defined as the results or the effects of a particular action. Now, most people begin to say, well, isn't that the intention? Because when we act with an intention. We intend something to happen, or we intend to accomplish something, some purpose or goal or result that we want to happen as a result of our actions. Now, that is the case. Our intention is always kind of an intended consequence of our action. Whenever we eat, we intend to sustain ourselves and things of this nature. But rarely are our intentions the only consequences of our actions. So that when we eat, yes, we may sustain ourselves with food, but at the same time, maybe we also catch some foodborne illness and get sick, so that we have two consequences of our actions. One we intended, which is to sustain ourselves, to get full, but then an unintended consequence would be to get sick. And so it would still be considered a consequence, but it wasn't our intention to get sick. And so when we look at consequences, we realize that the word consequence typically has a broader range. And so it really includes everything else that happens because of our actions, whether we intend them or not. Now, consequences are lumped into the circumstances of an action. So we have the three sources of morality: the object, the intention, and the circumstances. And consequences fall under the circumstances, given that it is a larger category of potentially unintended results of our actions. Because it is classified as a circumstance, it's a secondary element in determining the morality of an act. Now, what that means is, unlike the object and the intention, which are primary, the secondary element, that is the consequences or circumstances, increase or decrease the moral goodness or evil of an act, but not necessarily change the quality, right? If you have a good object and a good intention, you have a good act. But if you have evil circumstances or bad consequences as a result of that good act, then that lessens the goodness, but it doesn't necessarily make it a bad act. For the same reason, if we had an act with a bad object or a bad intention, then we have a bad act. But maybe the consequences of that particular act were quite good. Well, that maybe lessens the evil of the act or increases for a little bit the goodness of the act, but it doesn't necessarily change the quality of the act. The act is still evil. So whether an act is evil or not is based solely upon, or primarily upon, the object and the intention, whereas the circumstances, and in this case the consequences of our actions, really only increase or decrease the moral goodness of an act. Now, when it comes to looking at the responsibility of the agent, that is the person doing the act, consequences can weigh into the culpability or how blameworthy they are for the goodness or the evil of an act, because an agent is responsible for considering all reasonably foreseen consequences. Meaning, when we make a decision, we should make a decision after having weighed the potential consequences of our actions. And we should be able to, through our intellect, foresee reasonable consequences, that if I do this particular thing, this could happen, or this is likely to happen. And if that's good enough, then we move on with the decision. If the potential consequences are bad enough, then it should be enough to kind of prevent us from making that particular decision. Now, for our purposes in this class, consequences in moral scenarios, we would basically take a two-step approach. The first thing we need to do when looking at a moral scenario that I may give you in an exercise or in a test is to identify the possible results or outcomes of the action. So oftentimes I will give you a moral scenario, and the scenario will simply say that the individual decided to do this, or it'll make a blanket statement that the individual did this particular action. And it may not give you anything subsequent to that in time. a murderer committed murder, but I don't really tell you anything after that. Or the individual decided to eat at a particular restaurant. I don't really tell you that he then went and ate at the restaurant and this happened. I don't give you any of that information. And so you have to start hypothesizing. And so, first of all, you need to look at the likelihood that the intention is successful. This individual decided to perform this act in order to fulfill this particular goal or purpose or intention. And so for us analyzing it, we have to look at, in the circumstances, what's the likelihood that this agent is successful in accomplishing his goal or purpose? The second thing we need to look at here in this first step is the other possible effects that could come about because of this action. What other secondary things could happen as a result of this action? Second, and this is usually what students typically do first, is if it's an illegal or an action that's not allowed, they usually first go to the legal ramifications. Could get caught, could get arrested, could go to jail, could go to prison. And that's well and good, but that should be secondary. The only consequences are not legal consequences. And so that's why I try to emphasize first the possible results and other effects of an action, and then only if it's a bad action or an illegal action or prohibited action, look at the likelihood of getting caught. And then second, the potential punishments. Now, this is still important because the likelihood of getting caught and the possible punishments would have further effects on this agent and maybe other people in the agent's life. Obviously, going to prison for, like, a father would have major ramifications on the wife or the children who are now void or do not have a father in the picture because of the legal ramifications of actions. So to give you an idea, let's walk through a couple of moral scenarios. So scenario number one, Jeff is leaving a party after some pretty heavy drinking, and he is in no condition to drive home, but he decides to drive home anyway, right? So I've given you no indication about what happens after he decided to drive home. Now, the object here is drunk driving. Even though I haven't indicated that he actually did drive, the object here, what he has resolved to do is to drive while intoxicated. His intention is to get home. More than likely, we can assume he wanted to get home safely and alive. And the circumstances here would be that he's leaving a party as opposed to a bar or a restaurant or just another friend's home or something. All we know is he's leaving a party, and it doesn't really weigh into the morality of the act. That's why it's a circumstantial piece of evidence. Okay, let's look at the possible results of this action. First of all, let's just assume he makes it home safely, all right? That could be one of the possible scenarios. This is one of the results of his intention, his intended result, his intended consequences to make it home safely. But maybe he gets pulled over and is arrested for driving while intoxicated. I've highlighted yellow here to kind of indicate this is something that happens to him. It's a kind of a negative consequence of his action, but it doesn't seem to really affect anyone else yet, and no one is really deprived of any kind of property or life or health or anything like that. Another similar possibility would be getting caught at a sobriety checkpoint. All right, maybe he's not doing anything that would indicate that he's driving intoxicated, but at a sobriety checkpoint, he ends up demonstrating that he is driving while intoxicated. Maybe he gets into a car accident, but there's no injury involved. Maybe it's a single vehicle crash. And in this case, his decision has resulted in his deprivation of property. He's ruined his car. And so now he's deprived himself of property because of this decision. Maybe he's in a car accident with serious injury to himself. Okay, so now not only has he deprived himself of property, he's deprived himself of health, reasonable health, due to his decision. Or maybe his own death. So he's deprived himself of the ultimate right, and that is the right to life, based upon his decision to drive while intoxicated. All of these indicating that he's really deprived himself. He's been unjust to himself, but of course his own death would be very unjust to others around him. Maybe a wife, children, friends, family, co-workers, and the like. But maybe he gets into a car accident resulting in injury to others, all right? So now his action has deprived himself of property and deprived someone else of maybe health, possibly their property if he destroyed their car as well. Or he got into a car accident which resulted in the death of someone else. Okay, now we're talking about, as far as legal ramifications go, manslaughter, vehicular homicide, depriving himself, more than likely, of just property, depriving others of just property, but mostly depriving others of the right to life because of his decision. All right, so those are some of the possible results of his actions, but let's look at some other effects that may come about because of this. When someone sees him leaving and driving off on his own, maybe that sets an example to others that, well, Jeff only had this many drinks, and I definitely only had that many drinks, so maybe I should be good to drive home. I respect Jeff, and therefore I think I'll drive home as well. I was thinking about getting a designated driver, but I'm going to drive myself home now. So he sets an example. Not to mention, if he arrives home safely, that maybe gives him a baseline for making further decisions. Oh, well, if I can have 3 or 4 or 5 drinks over a certain span of time and drive home safely, then that'll be kind of my litmus test. You know, if I can keep myself to that, then I'll just drive home every time. Or maybe I felt just fine. Maybe next time I'll drink 1 or 2 more and then try to make it home. I seem to be okay. And so it maybe sets the baseline for poor decisions in the future. Not to mention, vehicular accidents, no matter what, increase the insurance premium or sometimes preclude certain types of coverages in the future, so that, you know, if the police are called and something is adjusted with the insurance, this can make it very difficult in the future to get proper insurance coverage. Not to mention, vehicular manslaughter results in criminal record, affecting prospective job opportunities and other similar associations for his future. Let's look at scenario number 2. Lori's at the mall shopping with her 8-year-old sister. She's looking for some shoes to go with a prom dress, and she finds the perfect pair, but they're well beyond her budget. She decides to grab them, put them in one of her shopping bags that she has with her, and walks out of the store without paying for them and takes her sister home. So the object here, of course, is theft. The intent is simply to acquire some shoes, all right, for a special occasion. And the circumstances would be that she's at a mall as opposed to other standalone stores. Another piece of circumstantial evidence is that she's with her 8-year-old sister as opposed to being alone. This is for her prom as opposed to just everyday usage. Or as a gift for someone else, and she hides them in a particular bag. All of this information, while kind of significant to the story, does not really change the moral quality of the act. It's clearly theft, and the intention, while being neutral in acquiring shoes, theft is wrong, and so we're looking at kind of a bad thing no matter what. So the possible results of scenario number 2 is that she gets away with it, right? She walks out, she walks home, she gets home, and prom goes off without a hitch, and she looks wonderful. But maybe she gets caught trying to leave the store, all right? The alarm system goes off, or she's caught on camera, or someone happens to see her and reports her in, you know, any number of these scenarios. Maybe her parents find out about it and punish her, and then take her through the whole process of returning them to the store and reporting it. All right, so those are some of the possible results, but let's look at some of the other effects of scenario 2. First of all, her sister's with her, all right? Assuming her sister saw this and is kind of maybe not an accessory to it, it sets an example for her sister, especially at a very impressionable age, as opposed to having a 16 or 18-year-old sister who definitely knows right and wrong. An 8-year-old, while maybe knowing right and wrong, is still impressionable, and this could set the tone for her future understanding of what is just property. Also, getting away with it may encourage future stealing, right? If she can get away with stealing that, what else can she get away with? Is this something that is going to affect her future decision making? And absolutely. Not to mention, she's depriving a company of just product and a loss on the product. And so now this company must take a loss, which of course has been seen to affect companies, their success, the prices of things, increasing security, which would mean increasing costs, which would mean increasing prices for the consumers. So these are some of the effects and what we want to look at as we move into analyzing moral scenarios for not only the object and the intention, but also the potential effects. And this will be very important for us, especially as we learn to make moral decisions as opposed to just analyzing moral scenarios.